We are back again with On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMAPlay365. I'm your host Newsome, and here we are for the third time this week. We're going to be here for the third event and final event in this short 7-day span. Of course, we'll be talking UFC Fight Island, where we have the flyweight title fight and the rematch between Figueiredo versus Benavidez from Abu Dhabi. Just before we get into this though, remember at MMAPlay365 we'll have our Fight Island offers running all the way up until the final Fight Island event on July 25th. You can get the handicapper monthly subscription and all the betting advice you'll ever need for just $10 for your first month. You can also get our daily fantasy sports monthly subscription and all the strategies and information you'll need for both DraftKings and FanDuel, also for just $10 for your first month. At $10 you are paying just $2.50 per event. After your first month the price will be $29.99 per month, but there are no cancellation fees with MMAPlay365, so you can cancel at any time for free if you wish to do so. Go and visit www.mmaplay365.com for more information or to sign up today. And with that introduction out the way, let's break down some fights. And in the first fight, we've got the flyweight title fight, the rematch. We've got Davison Figuerado versus Joe Benavidez Ii. And on the money line, we've got Figueiredo, currently the -200 favourite, with the comeback on Joe Benavidez at +170. Now, I totally understand this betting line. Figueiredo looked great in their last fight. He's looking better fight after fight. Benavidez is looking a little bit older each fight. He's still got the skills to win this fight for sure. But as I said with Volkanovski versus Holloway when I broke that fight down, if you look at that first fight and cap that first fight, you would probably cap it roughly around where it is now with how that fight played out. So I think the line's totally fair. I still think there's value on Figueiredo at this current line as well. But on the flip side of that, if anyone's out there betting Joe Benavidez at +170, then I don't hate that bet either, As for where the line moves, I do think more money is going to come in on Joe Benavidez. I think people are going to recognise the name. They're going to recognise that Benavidez has been at the top of the division for his entire UFC career. And I think he'll get more respect coming in closer to fight night. So I do think maybe on Thursday, Friday, and even fight day itself that we'll see that line closing in a little bit. And as for how this fight plays out, the one sketchy thing, in my opinion, from Figueiredo's perspective is he was tested positive for COVID-19, so we were told Figueiredo and his team weren't happy about something regarding that testing. I'm not quite sure what that was, so they retested him. He tested negative, so the fight's still on, but he's still got that 48-hour quarantine. He's still got to fly over to Abu Dhabi, and then he'll have to quarantine again, and then he's got some weight to cut as well. His team did say that he was 10 pounds lighter at this stage than what he was during the weight cut for his last fight against Benavidez. So if that's true, then, that's good for Figueiredo because that'll certainly help him with his weight cut. That's the real sketchy thing about this. But if Figueiredo comes in, he makes weight, he looks good, or even if he doesn't make weight, as long as he's not really hammered his body with the weight cut and he doesn't have too much jet lag and things like that, I think he'll look great in this fight. He looked great in his last fight, He started off really strong. He was pushing Benavidez back. He did slow down a little bit at the end of round 1, but then he came out round 2. He was competitive again. So the gas tank doesn't really worry me unless we really do see a 4th and 5th round. But at that point, I think Figueiredo will have won at least 2 of those opening 3 rounds, and then he would just need 1 of the championship rounds, which he can dig deep. We've never really seen him gassed out so much that he's got his hands on his knees and he can't perform. So I think Figueiredo is going to look okay here. The fact that he could push Benavidez back is really going to help his case in this fight because Benavidez likes to be the one dictating the pace, dictating the range. And that's purely because with the range perspective, Benavidez likes to slide in and out of range into that boxing range, landing shots. And when he can do that against opponents, it's very difficult to beat him just because of his speed. But with Figueiredo being able to force Benavidez back, he doesn't give him the opportunity to dictate the pace, and that's a really key thing here. The other thing that I noticed from that last fight as well is I think we're seeing the explosiveness of Benavidez really diminish, and what I mean by that is when he was coming forwards, he wasn't as explosive with his hands. He wasn't putting together the long combinations that he usually puts together. And with the takedowns as well, he shot a couple of takedowns against Figueiredo. And albeit Figueiredo's takedown defense has improved, but Benavidez's wrestling is really, really good. And the fact that he couldn't take Figueiredo down and his entries were a little more laboured than what we've seen before, it just shows me personally that explosiveness just isn't there. It's not the same as what we've seen previously from Benavidez. So if that is the case, then again, I favour Figueiredo to win the fight. The one thing that I will say about that last fight in regards to the knockout, I really do think the clash of heads caused a problem for Benavidez. I think he came off badly in that exchange, and I do believe Benavidez when he says that ultimately led to the knockout, because if he was already dazed at that point, the right hand that Figueiredo knocked him out with, it's no surprise that Benavidez went out. On the flip side to all this though, if Benavidez does come into this fight sharper, if he is better conditioned, if that weight cut went better for him, over 5 rounds, if Benavidez can take one of those first 3 and not get finished, then 4 and 5. And at that point, I would be favouring Benavidez to win the fight, because I believe he would win 3 rounds to 2. So it's imperative here, in my opinion, for Figueiredo to start fast and take not only 2 out of those first 3 rounds, but he needs to hurt Benavidez early. He needs to land that power on him, because he can't let Benavidez start finding his range, finding his pace, because then that will make it difficult for Figueiredo to win the fight. But overall, I like the aggression of Davison Figueiredo. I like the power of Figueiredo. I like the fact that he's really well-rounded too, so he's well-versed on the mat. His takedown defense has improved, so he'll not be on his back so much, but his grappling is really good topside. He's a good scrambler, and I think he's going to get off to a fast start again. I think he could hurt Benavidez as well early on. I just like what I'm seeing from Davison Figueiredo. I just think he's the better fighter, the fresher fighter, and the fighter that's looking better and better each fight. So I'm going to be picking Davison Figueiredo to win and become the new flyweight champion. And in the next fight, we've got another fun one in the middleweight division. We've got Kelvin Gastelum versus Jack Hermansson. Gastelum currently the -115 favourite. The comeback on Hermansson, the slight -105 underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I think the lines are so close, and if you've got a good read on either side, I think both sides of this fight are definitely playable. I've got a funny feeling that this fight won't be close either. I think one of these fighters is going to win quite decisively. So, like I say, if you've got that good read and you've bet this fight, you could end up getting an easy win right here. As for where the line moves, I'm not too sure, because Jack Hermansson's been a plus money underdog for a long time in the lead up to this fight. And only last night, a lot of money came in on him. So I'm not sure where the trend is going to be with this fight. I think people will either see Gastelum, who's been at the top of the division forever, and will like the bet on him. But on the flip side, Jack Hermansson is the up-and-comer. Yes, he suffered a setback against Jared Cannonier in his last fight, and Gastelum didn't look great against Till in his last fight, so maybe people are going to like the young, hungry underdog. I'm not sure which way it's going to go. It wouldn't shock me if this fight closed as a pick'em. But as for what I think about this fight, for a start, when I rewatched the Gastelum and Till fight, it wasn't as one-sided as what I remembered it. Gastelum was still game in that fight. Till did rightfully win the fight, but Gastelum wasn't as bad as what I thought he was. But with that said, I don't really know what to expect with Gastelum, because I definitely don't think he's as good as a fighter as he once was. I'm not saying he's declining, but I definitely think that his better days are behind him. And he's really small for the division as well. He does make that size differential up with his aggression and his power. He drops pretty much every fighter that he fights. But just as I mentioned with Joe Benavidez as well, if Gastelum loses this speed and this explosiveness, then I think he's going to be in trouble in this middleweight division, because essentially that's what he needs to get inside and to make his shots count because of that size differential. With Hermansson's a tall middleweight. He's an explosive middleweight. He fires hard kicks. He comes in and out of range really well. He has good movement, lateral movement. He'll look for takedowns. If he gets on top of his opponents, he's got some of the nastiest ground and pound that we've seen in the UFC. However, the problem that comes with Hermansson is if he starts to feel himself fall behind in the fight, we saw this with Cannonier, the other fight that I can think of as well with Thiago Santos, when he can't get his game going, it's almost like he shuts down quite a lot. And at that point, it's really worrying, because he allows himself to be pushed back. He allows his opponent to start implementing their game. And you can't do that against Kelvin Gastelum. If you do that against Gastelum, he's going to knock you out. So for me, it's about how Jack Hermansson really starts this fight. I actually quite like the fact that Gastelum's a southpaw, Hermansson's the orthodox, from Hermansson's side, because I do believe that the kicks that he throws are very hard, they're very fast, and he's going to have that open southpaw body of Gastelum to really slam those kicks in. On the flip side, Gastelum's straight left is also going to be a predominant weapon for him. You know, that straight left down the pipe against the orthodox fighter is definitely going to be there, so Hermansson's got to be careful. It's a really intriguing fight, but I think in the early stages in this fight, if Hermansson comes out, stays at range, doesn't let Gastelum close the distance and starts firing hard body kicks, even if Gastelum's blocking them with his arms, some of those kicks will get through. I think if some of those kicks do get through, it can really hurt Gastelum to the body. And at that point, Gastelum might start slowing down. It might affect his cardio. And then Hermansson can just dictate the pace of the fight with the range. And I think that's key because you can't let Gastelum get inside too often. I'm not sure whether Hermansson's going to be able to score many takedowns in this fight just because of the size. He's going to have to duck much lower than he's used to get into the hips of Gastelum. And Gastelum isn't an easy fighter to take down. He's also got a good get-up game as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Hermansson can get those takedowns. But on the feet, I definitely think at range, if Hermansson can keep the fight at range, then he's got a lot of advantages with the stance clash. And like I say, I think body kicks are going to be key in this fight. Maybe the inside leg kick as well for Hermansson. But I really do think that at range, the kicking game could really work for Jack Hermansson in this fight. It wouldn't shock me to see Kelvin Gastelum win, especially if he starts this fight really well. Like I say, when fighters start well against Hermansson, it really does set him on the back foot and he doesn't look like he's confident in that fight at that point. So it wouldn't shock me to see Gastelum win or even knock him out. But I do favour Jack Hermansson with the style versus style in this fight. So I'm going to be picking Jack Hermansson to win the fight. And in the next fight, this is one of my favourite fights on the entire card. We've got Marc Diakiese versus Rafael Fiziev. It should have been Diakiese versus Alan Patrick, but Patrick had to pull out of the fight. We've got Marc Diakiese, currently the -160 favourite. The comeback on Fiziev at +140 as the underdog. Now, as for the betting line and where the value is, I do think there's value on Diakiese's line. I think when you look at the striking between these fighters, they're both really good strikers, but the reason I believe there's value on Diakiese is because this isn't a K1 fight, it's not a Muay Thai fight, it's mixed martial arts, and I simply think Diakiese is the better mixed martial artist in this fight. As for where the line moves, I do think we're going to see more money coming in on Diakiese the closer it gets to fight night. I think people are going to respect the striking credentials of Fiziev. But as I say, when you look at an overall game, paths to victory, I just think it's quite evident why Diakiese is the favourite in this fight. And as for how this fight plays out, I think it's going to be really interesting in the early stages in this fight because both fighters are good strikers. You've got Fiziev that's got the Muay Thai background. He's got a quick, accurate kicking game, really crisp as well. If he can get his game going, get his movement going, he can get inside, he can land punches. But in regards to Fiziev's movement, I almost see two kind of styles in there. So the first style that I see in his movement is that traditional Muay Thai style of movement where the fighters don't move too much. It's more of a stalking style and they'll wait for their opponents to come in and then hit them with hard counters. But as we saw in Fiziev's last fight against Alex White, and no disrespect to Alex White, but Fiziev was just a better fighter there. And I think when Fiziev's in that position where he is clearly the better fighter, he can move forward, he can get his movement going, he can be quick in and out of the pocket. But like I say, that tends to be, for me, when he's clearly the better fighter because his opponent will allow that movement to happen. Whereas with Diakiese, Fiziev is definitely not clearly the better fighter in this fight. I don't think Diakiese will allow Fiziev to have his way with him, come forward and do whatever he wants. Diakiese is going to be pushing forward himself as well. He's also got an extremely explosive kicking game, all types of kicks in that arsenal of weapons, and he's also got a very deadly low kick as well from either side. You know, when Lando Venata switched stances because of the leg kicks in his last fight, he just started smashing the inside leg kick from the southpaw stance. So Diakiese can really do it all when it comes to the kicking game. So if Fiziev does start to come forward a little bit more than Diakiese would like, I think the kicks of Diakiese will push Fiziev back. But the fundamentals are there for Diakiese as well. You know, he's got an educated jab. He throws his straight right from that jab as well, but that jab will also set up the kicks. It'll also set up takedowns. And this is where I was saying that Diakiese is just the better MMA fighter because I think his wrestling is very underappreciated. I don't think people talk about it as much as they should. He's got a really good wrestling game. He can get fights to the mat. And also, topside is really heavy on top. He doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't allow his fighters to start trying to lock up arm bars or triangles. Not that Fiziev will, that's not his style. But he can also keep fighters on the mat for long periods as well, which helps him win rounds. Even if it's just 90 seconds or 2 minutes, it helps you win a round, especially if it's close. So I think Diakiese can really mix it up in this fight. I'm not convinced that if Diakiese gets Fiziev down, that Fiziev can just get back up to his feet really easily. I think Diakiese will be able to spend periods of time on top of Fiziev and, like I say, take those rounds. The striking is going to be really interesting. I do think that if they clinch up, that Diakiese is just the more physical fighter. He's huge for 155. I'm still not sure how he makes that weight, but I just think that there's a lot of good things going for Diakiese here. And if it does get a little dicey on the feet, if Fiziev does start to get the better of him in moments, I believe the takedowns are there for Diakiese. And like I say, it'll relieve that pressure. It'll put Fiziev down. It'll look good in the judges' eyes. And when the fight starts back on the feet, Fiziev might be a little bit more apprehensive to come forward and really let strikes go because he knows that takedown threat is there. I just like this spot for Diakiese, so I'm going to pick Marc Diakiese to win the fight. And in the next fight, this fight's been booked multiple times now, so it finally goes down this Saturday. We've got Ariane Lipski versus Luana Carolina. Currently, we've got Lipski at the slight -115 favourite. The comeback on Carolina at -105 as the underdog. Again, like I said with Gastelum and Hermansson, if you've got a really good read on this fight, then both sides are playable. But I really do think this fight is going to play out very, very close. As for how this line moves, I think that we're going to see more money coming in on Lipski the closer it gets to fight night. She's the more experienced fighter. She's the more recognised name. And overall, people just like Lipski. So I think when you're looking at where the money's going to come in, I do think that we might see Lipski pushed out to -125, maybe -130 come fight night. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I really think a key factor here is how quick Carolina starts the fight, because she did start slow against Cachoeira. She has started slow in previous fights as well, but she does build into fights. So for me, it's important that if she does start slow in this fight, that Lipski really closes the distance, doesn't let Carolina work, puts her under pressure, maybe ties up with her, maybe tries to take her down, spend some time on top of her. Lipski has got a good ground game once she gets on top and she can get her opponent settled. So if she can get Carolina tired first before she really gets going, that's going to give Lipski a good opportunity to win this fight and take at least 2 out of the 3 rounds should it hit the scorecards. However, if Carolina doesn't start off slow, does get her jab going, does get her striking going, she's got really, really good volume, much better volume than what Lipski has. So Lipski can't stay at a decent range with Carolina and just let her get off on strikes, because she's probably going to lose all 3 rounds if she does that purely on volume. As I said, if it hits the scorecards, which I believe it will, if Carolina's just landing strike after strike and really racking up volume, how can Lipski take a decision in that scenario? So it's going to be really important for Carolina not to start slow. However, with that said, I do trust the experience of Lipski. I think she's been in there with some better fighters. You know, she's not had an easy start in the UFC, but I think that she can close the distance early on. I think she can get Carolina down. I think she can work on Carolina. Carolina might be able to stand back up, but Lipski has got to stick to that sort of game plan, in my opinion, because if she doesn't, it's going to get very dicey for her. I do think the fight's going to play out close, purely because I do think if Lipski does take Carolina down, that Carolina can get back up and she will be landing strikes on Lipski before maybe Lipski closes the distance again. That's why I think it's going to be quite close. But as I said, Lipski's got the experience. She has got the abilities to fight really good fights. It's just we've not been able to see too many of those opportunities in the UFC of Lipski looking really good. But I know for a fact those qualities are there. So I am going to take Ariane Lipski to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun one at flyweight. We've got Alejandra Pantoja versus Askar Askarov. Pantoja currently the -200 favourite with the comeback on Askarov at +170 as the underdog. I totally understand this betting line. I still think there's a little bit of value on Pantoja, albeit very minimal at this point. I just think he's the better fighter right now, and it's no surprise that Pantoja was the backup to the flyweight title fight we've got between Figueiredo and Benavidez. If one of them does drop out, it will be Pantoja, I'm told, that will step up. So it's no surprise that UFC have put him in that position. As for where the line moves, I do think we might see some money coming in on Askarov. I think people might see +170 as too wide and closer to fight night. I think as the money comes in, we'll see Pantoja come back to the original sort of -175, -180 line. If it does go the other way and Pantoja's sitting at -225, maybe even -250, I think that line would be too wide at that point. So that's why I believe the money's going to come in on Askarov. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I think that the only real advantage that Askarov's got against Pantoja is the wrestling, is the takedowns. But the problem is from Askarov's side is I don't think the takedowns and the wrestling is night and day better than Pantoja. I think Pantoja will be able to see takedowns come in. He will be able to maybe stuff a few. He'll definitely be able to scramble in between the takedown and the fight hitting the mat. And if Askarov does get Pantoja's back on the mat, I think Pantoja's a better grappler. He'll be throwing up submissions from bottom. He'll be able to stand back up if he needs to. You know, I don't see a scenario where Askarov is spending 90 seconds, 2 minutes, or even half a round on top of Pantoja. I just really don't see that happening at all. Now, I don't think Askarov's a bad grappler either. His jiu-jitsu is really good. We have seen that in his previous fights. So I don't think Pantoja's going to be able to wrap anything up from his back on Askarov, which is important because that'll mean that Askarov can stay safe on top. But like I say, I just don't think the top position of Askarov is going to win him this fight just because I don't think he can keep Pantoja down for that long. When you look at the striking of these guys, again, Askarov isn't a bad striker, but Pantoja's Muay Thai style, his low kicks, his combinations, his willingness to trade violent shots inside the pocket, make the fight a brawl. His chin is a little questionable. He was hurt a little bit against Matt Schnell, but eventually Stone Cold knocked out Matt Schnell. So Pantoja is a good striker. He throws in volume. He throws in combinations. He mixes kicks up with his punches. He's good in the clinch as well. I just think that the striking differential in this fight is the biggest gap in skill. So for that reason, I think that Pantoja will have the advantages on the feet. I think he will have some takedowns to defend for sure. But he could even land takedowns on Askarov. And if he does land takedowns on Askarov, the one side of Askarov's game that I really don't like is his overconfidence off his back in throwing submissions up triangles, arm bars, trying to submit his opponent off his back. He's what we call a guard player. And I really don't like that, especially in this fight, because Pantoja, I'd be shocked if he gets caught with any sort of submission with Askarov on his back. So with what I've just said about Askarov maybe not being able to hold down Pantoja for too long, I think if Pantoja wanted to take this fight to the mat, he could spend the periods of time on top of Askarov that Askarov wouldn't be able to spend on top of him. So again, round winning stuff. So when you really look at the bigger picture of this fight, I think Pantoja's got the better striking. I think he's going to be better in the clinch. I think he's going to be able to defend any takedowns or scramble out of him or stand back up if he does get taken down. And I think that Pantoja can even take Askarov down and spend long periods of time on top of him. So overall, I just think Pantoja's got more paths to victory. I think the style versus style is favourable for Pantoja as well. So I'm going to pick Alejandra Pantoja to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got another super fun fight here. We've got a madman versus the angry man. We've got Khadis Ibragimov versus Roman Dolidze. Roman Dolidze currently the -185 favourite. The comeback on Ibragimov at +160. As for the value on the money line, I don't see any value on this current money line. I think the betting line is just way too wide, considering that I believe anything could happen in this fight. I think we're going to see a finish. I'm not sure who the finish is going to be for. I do believe it'll either be Ibragimov early or Dolidze late. I do think it's one of those types of fights. But like I say, if you're laying +160 on Ibragimov, I think that's the better bet. But you're playing somebody that has known gas tank issues, but he's so dangerous early on that I think if you're playing -185 on Dolidze, it's probably not the right side to bet. And as for where the line moves closer to fight night, I do think it's going to close up for that reason, because I genuinely think it's just a little bit too wide. I don't think it'll close up massively. I don't think we'll see a pick'em. But if money's coming in on any side here, I do think it's going to be the plus 160 of Ibragimov. And as for how this fight plays out, I did say at the start we've got a madman versus an angry man. The madman being Khadis Ibragimov, the angry man being Roman Dolidze. You know, Ibragimov comes out fast, hard. He doesn't throw any caution to the wind when it comes to his gas tank. He simply looks like he doesn't care. It's almost as if he wants to come out there and finish somebody, or, you know, suffer the consequences. And then, like I said, from Dolidze's perspective, this dude is just a ball of anger. He's in the cage, he's grunting, he's showing his teeth, so to speak, obviously gum guard and all that. But the man just looks angry, like he wants to get in there and hurt somebody. He is a little bit more reserved with his striking. He won't go in there throwing wild, crazy combinations at 100 mile an hour like Ibragimov does. He will enter the pocket. He'll throw maybe 1 or 2 big, hard strikes. And if they don't land, he'll back off. But he's got power. So is Ibragimov. And this is why I think the fight's going to finish, because both fighters here have huge power. Both fighters here are massively aggressive. Both fighters look to push forward and pressure at all times. So I think the clash of those styles is going to make both fighters meet in the middle and stand and bang. I favour Dolidze in this fight purely because of the gas tank of Ibragimov. I'll never usually favour a fighter that just gasses that hard. I think Dolidze is going to maybe fall short earlier on in the fight. I think Ibragimov will come forward recklessly, hard, fast, like I said, 100 mile an hour. But the fact is here, if he doesn't get Dolidze out early on in this fight during those moments, then he's going to definitely gas. He's going to start falling short. His volume's not going to be there. The power won't be there for him. And I think at that point, Dolidze is going to have a lot of success and knock him out late. So I'm going to pick Roman Dolidze to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is going to be a fun one from a wrestling and grappling perspective. We've got Grant Dawson versus Nad Narimani. Grant Dawson currently sitting as the minus 250 favourite, with the comeback on Narimani at plus 210. Now, I actually think there's still a little bit of value on Grant Dawson at the minus 250 line. Again, it's minimal. I think the fight might play out a little bit closer than the line suggests, but I don't see Grant Dawson losing this fight in this spot. And as for where the line moves closer to fight night, I don't think we're going to see a huge jump in either side, but it wouldn't shock me to see Grant Dawson maybe close around the minus 275 line. As I said, it's not going to be a huge difference from where it is now, but I just struggle to see much Nad Narimani money coming in. As for how the fight plays out, as you've probably already guessed, I am picking Grant Dawson to win this fight. I don't think the takedowns are going to be that easy for Dawson. I will give Narimani credit in that respect because he's not a bad wrestler himself, and he's also big, he's strong, he's got good hips. But Grant Dawson will turn relentless with his wrestling if he needs to. And I think at that point when Narimani is having to defend takedown after takedown, he knows the takedowns will be coming from that point. I don't think he'll be able to get any strikes off against Dawson because I think it's going to make him very hesitant once Dawson does start that relentless wrestling game going. And eventually Dawson's going to get Narimani down. Now again, credit from Narimani's perspective, I do think he's going to be able to stand back up in the early takedowns as well. But once Dawson secured 2, 3 or 4 takedowns, I think it's really going to hit Narimani from a mental perspective, and those takedowns will just become a little bit easier for Dawson. I think Dawson's a very good grappler. I think he's the better grappler, especially topside. I think once he does get Narimani down to the point where he can get his back down, pin him down and stay on top, I think he's just going to be able to work Narimani on the mat for sure. And at that point, Dawson's going to be winning rounds. He's also going to have opportunities to finish the fight as well. He's got good ground and pound. He's got good submissions as well. So Narimani has got to be on his A game in this fight to win. He's got to be able to stop the takedowns coming. But the fact that Grant Dawson is a very good wrestler with striking improving fight after fight as well, I'm just not totally convinced Narimani will come out there and think that he can put on a striking clinic against Dawson. And if he does that, then I think Dawson's going to score takedowns in the middle of the cage opposed to having to push Narimani back up to the cage, which is actually Narimani's best chance of defending the takedown. So I think it's a bad stylistic matchup for Narimani. I think Grant Dawson's going to be able to get his game plan going. Maybe not in the early stages of the fight, but I do believe that the longer this fight goes on, the more Grant Dawson's going to look really good inside the cage. So I'm going to pick Grant Dawson to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got the return of Joe Duffy versus Joel Alvarez. Joe Duffy currently the -365 favourite. The comeback on Alvarez at +305. Again, I totally understand this betting line. I think this fight is a really bad mismatch. I think Joe Duffy has got a good stylistic fight ahead of him against a fighter that I believe he's just better everywhere. Obviously, there's not much value here playing Joe Duffy straight because of the betting line, but you know, I wouldn't be surprised to see Duffy in a few parlays at -365. But with that being said, if Joe Duffy does hit the -400, -450 mark at that point, it would just be a complete pass from a betting perspective. And as for where the line moves, I'm not sure it moves a massive amount, to be honest. If it does move anywhere, I do think Duffy will become the bigger favourite in this fight. I just don't think people are going to be rushing to the betting window to take Alvarez at +305. I know it's a big number, but like I say, he's fighting Joe Duffy and it's not a great fight for him. So it wouldn't shock me to see Duffy coming in as a bigger favourite, but I don't think it's going to move too much. Because on the flip side, are people really going to be rushing to the betting window to lay -365 on Duffy? I'm not too sure, just because it is a very big line. So yeah, it's probably going to close very similar to where we're at right now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, again, I just think that Duffy's better everywhere. I think he's the better striker for sure. I think he's got better wrestling than Alvarez. The one area that Alvarez is going to be most dangerous in this fight is on the mat. If Duffy takes him down, Alvarez can be quite tricky off his back. He does throw up triangles, arm bars. He's got the dexterity in his legs to pull those submissions off as well. But at this level, do I really think that Alvarez is going to submit Duffy off his back with an armbar or a triangle? I'm really not convinced that that can happen in this fight. I think Duffy's too good, too much of a vet to let anything like that happen. And in regards to the wrestling, if Alvarez can take Duffy down, then Alvarez is obviously going to do his best work on top of Duffy. But again, Duffy's just got a big wrestling advantage in this fight. So if any fighter takes the other fighter down, I think it's going to be Duffy on top of Alvarez. And Duffy's just got to mind his P's and Q's to make sure he doesn't get caught with anything daft. But yeah, the path to victory in this fight, I think if it stays standing, it's Duffy's fight all day long. I think he's the better boxer. He's the more crisp boxer. He'll mix in kicks as well. Just on the feet, Duffy is the better fighter. And on the mat, I think Duffy is going to be the better fighter there as well, because I believe it'll be Duffy on top opposed to Duffy on his back. So wherever this fight goes, I think that Duffy is going to have advantages and he is going to be able to win. So I'll be really, really shocked if Joel Alvarez manages to pull this off. And for that reason, I'm going to pick Joe Duffy to win this fight. And in the next fight, and this is an amazing matchup, by the way, we've got Brett Johns versus Montel Jackson, a huge fight at bantamweight. And on the money line, we've got Montel Jackson, the current -220 favourite. The comeback on Brett Johns at +180. I think this line is absolutely atrocious. I love Montel Jackson. I've cashed money on him previously. I love Brett Johns as well. I've cashed money on him previously as well. So it's going to be a tough fight for me to watch. But like I say, the line's atrocious. I think it should be much closer. I'm not against Montel Jackson being the favourite in this fight. In fact, I kind of get it. The height, the reach, the physique, the athleticism. You know, he's got less miles on the clock. But man, when you look at the experience of Johns, who he's fought, and he's only lost to Aljamain Sterling and Pedro Munoz, it does shock me that he's so big of an underdog in this fight. And for that reason, I think the value is definitely on Brett Johns at this moment in time. As for where the line moves, I think we're going to see more money coming in on Johns for sure, just because he shouldn't be this big of a dog. And he actually opened at +235, I believe, as well. So the money has definitely been coming in on Brett Johns since then. And I think that trend continues until this closes up quite a bit. Wouldn't shock me to see Brett Johns close at +150 in this fight, because I do think that people will like Montel Jackson more than Brett Johns in this fight. So if Montel Jackson does get to maybe -175, I think people will start putting money on him, but it's definitely going to close up for sure. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I think it's a really, really intriguing fight, because I do think that Jackson has got the striking advantage in this fight, and like I've already mentioned, he's got physical advantages as well, height, reach. The height's actually only 3 inches, so it's not a massive deal, but the arm reach and the leg reach, I think, is definitely going to be there for Jackson. And in regards to the striking as well, I think the stance clash between them both, with Jackson being the southpaw, Johns being the orthodox fighter, I do think that favours Jackson a little bit more, because that will allow him to get his kicks off. He'll start kicking to the open body of Johns, and what that'll allow Jackson to implement a little bit easier for himself is that distance, not letting Johns get in close, start shooting takedowns. So I do think the advantage is for Jackson on the feet, but as for Johns, that's assuming Johns doesn't get his game going at all, and I don't believe that's going to be the case. I do think Johns will be able to close the distance. His striking, it's not spectacular, but it's also more than good enough to hang with fighters like Jackson and other good fighters in the division until he can close that distance and look for his takedowns. Those strikes help him set up the entries to the takedowns. I think Brett Johns is going to be able to close the distance in this fight. I think he is going to be able to get on the hips of Montel Jackson. And the last time we saw Montel Jackson fight a wrestler, it was Ricky Simone on his UFC debut. Simone managed to take him down 7 times in that fight. Credit to Montel Jackson, he was standing right back up off most of those takedowns, but it's the fact he kept on getting dumped and dumped and dumped, and that's what cost him the fight. That's why he lost the fight. And I actually think that although Ricky Simone is probably the better wrestler than Johns, Brett Johns has got way better grappling than Ricky Simone. Johns is a legit BJJ black belt. He's got good grappling. He can take a back. He can keep fighters down to the mat. So I don't think Brett Johns would need 7 takedowns in this fight. And I'm not saying that Montel Jackson couldn't stand back up from the takedowns of Johns, but A, I don't think it's going to be as easy. And B, I think if Johns persists with this game plan, that eventually Jackson won't be able to get up as easily and he might not be able to get up at all. I think if Johns can get the fight to that point, he's going to have a huge advantage on the mat because his grappling is legit. And for anybody saying that Brett Johns' wrestling isn't good enough to get Jackson down to the mat because Jackson's got wrestling, go and look at the wrestling credentials of Tony Gravely, who Brett Johns fought in his last fight. I also cashed Brett Johns as a plus money underdog in that fight. But Gravely has got serious credentials in wrestling. Brett Johns managed to take him down 6 times. Johns got took down 5 times as well. You know, I'm not shocked at that when you look at Gravely's wrestling accolades. But Brett Johns was able to work scrambles, work his grappling, and turn some of those takedowns from Gravely into advantageous positions himself. So I think Brett Johns has got huge advantages in this fight. I think he's able to win this fight. I think it's not going to be easy, but he will be able to get Jackson down if he really commits to that game plan. Now, on the flip side, if he can't get Montel Jackson down, or if Jackson won't let him anywhere close, then Montel is just going to beat him all day long just because of that range, the striking, the volume, and like I say, the style versus style on the feet massively favours Montel Jackson. But I just prefer the more experienced Brett Johns. He's been in there with other good world-class fighters. I think Montel Jackson's ceiling is extremely high. I think he's got a super bright future. But in this spot, I am going to have to favour the style of Johns in regards to the wrestling and grappling, and with him being the more experienced fighter. So I'm picking Brett Johns to win this fight. And in the next fight, I think this is going to be a super fun fight as well. We've got Malcolm Gordon versus Amir Al-Bazi. Amir Al-Bazi currently the minus 170 favourite. The comeback on Gordon at plus 145 as the underdog. Both debutants, so it's really interesting that we've got one of these guys at minus 170. I thought the line was going to be much closer after watching tape on these guys, and for that reason, I do think the value is with Malcolm Gordon. I think he looks like a really interesting fighter, and actually after I wrapped up tape on this fight, I was unsure why Malcolm Gordon was even the underdog at all in this fight. So for me, as I've said, Malcolm Gordon holds the value at plus 145. And as for where the line moves, I do think we're going to see it close up as well, because honestly, Malcolm Gordon shouldn't be a plus 145 underdog in this fight. I think people will realise that the closer it gets to fight night, and I think people will be more inclined to put the money on Malcolm Gordon at plus 145 than they will on Al-Bazi at minus 170. As for how this fight plays out, I am really interested to see how it plays out, because Al-Bazi isn't a bad fighter. He is minus 170, so he is being respected on the betting line. He is hyped as well. There was a reason that Brave Combat Federation put him against Jose Shorty Torres. As for Al-Bazi's style, he will come forward aggressively, he will wing bombs, he'll mix in kicks as well, he'll look for opportunistic takedowns. His grappling does look to be good also. But when we talk about good grappling, go and watch Malcolm Gordon. This guy reminds me a lot of Brandon Royval in regards to he doesn't mind being on the mat, whether it's on top or bottom. He's got slick transitions between arm bars to triangles to kimuras. He's just a very, very good grappler. And on the feet, he's tall, he's long, he's got good straight punches. His punches allow him to hang with opponents at this level like Al-Bazi until he can try and get a body lock and try and get the fight down to the mat. He can make mistakes from time to time in regards to scrambling and actually pulling opponents on top of him. But like I say, he just doesn't care because his grappling is slick. He knows it, and that's where he's most comfortable. And that's where I think he's going to win this fight. I saw Al-Bazi knocked down quite a few times against Shorty Torres. I'm not saying that Gordon's got the striking of Torres, but it does make me believe that Al-Bazi might be a little bit chinny when he's caught. So Gordon has knocked out people before. He does have sneaky power in accumulation of volume. And I think that Malcolm Gordon is going to be the slightly better fighter on the feet. I think if it hits the mat, he's so tricky to deal with, and that's why I was surprised that he's an underdog in this fight. Not that Al-Bazi's bad. Al-Bazi's actually got a good top game. He's got good pressure, heavy pressure on top. But I just think that Gordon is going to be slicker on the mat. I think if Al-Bazi makes one mistake, it's one of those types of fights where he could get punished for it and be tapping out shortly after. And on the feet, it's also going to be a close fight. But if Al-Bazi pushes forward too recklessly, I think Gordon will either catch him with some shots coming in, or Gordon will just get a hold of him and try and take him down to the mat. The worst position in this fight is going to be for Al-Bazi to be on his back, because I think Gordon will absolutely work him. Whereas if Al-Bazi's on top, I think Gordon has a chance on bottom as well. Like I say, I just feel that Gordon is slightly better in every single area of the fight. It could play out very close, but I think Gordon's got more paths to victory as well. I'm going to take Malcolm Gordon to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that's been booked a few times already. I'm absolutely stoked for this fight. I think it's a phenomenal matchup. We've got David Ramos versus Arman Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan currently the -210 favourite, with the comeback on Ramos as the +175 underdog. After watching tape, I actually think that this line is very, very fair. Arman Tsarukyan is an unbelievably good fighter. David Ramos is a good fighter as well, but there's something about Tsarukyan that makes me believe that he could be a top prospect in this division. I think there is marginal value at the current line. I think if it gets stupid and more money comes on here and he becomes a much bigger favourite, I think at that point it'll be dog or pass, because you've got to respect Ramos. But right now, I do believe the value is there on Arman Tsarukyan. As for where the line moves, I think honestly I could make an argument of money coming in either way. Like I say, Tsarukyan is really exciting, a prospect that we think is going to do big things in the UFC. But then on the flip side, David Ramos is so dangerous. The guy is legit. He's got serious credentials in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt too. And on the feet, he hits like an absolute truck. He's a big guy, hits very hard. You cannot get hit clean by Ramos because it will hurt you. It'll likely rock you or knock you out. So like I say, I can see money coming in on either side here. I think the line is going to close roughly where we're at right about now. As for how this fight plays out, I do favour Tsarukyan here. I think that his striking is a work in progress. It is developing, but we are seeing those developments from fight to fight. I think he doesn't hit as hard as Ramos, but he does move a little bit better. The orthodox versus orthodox stance style in this fight will allow Tsarukyan to land those spin back kicks to the body, which is a kick that he really likes to throw. In his last fight, with it being southpaw versus orthodox against Oben Mercier, that spin back kick wasn't as prominent because of the stance clash. But as I mentioned in the introduction to the breakdown of this fight, you've got to be careful of Ramos. You can't overcommit, because if he lands one of those bombs, it could be a fight-ending punch. But in the striking overall, I think Tsarukyan's going to have more volume. I think he's going to have a wider, more vast arsenal of weapons. I think he's going to be quicker as well. So as long as he doesn't make a big mistake and get caught, I do favour Tsarukyan in the striking department very slightly. When it comes to the wrestling, I do think that Tsarukyan's going to shoot on David Ramos. Makhachev didn't really try very much to shoot on Ramos. I think he showed that respect of the BJJ qualities that Ramos possesses, but I think Tsarukyan's going to get in on a single leg in this fight. I think he's going to push Ramos back to the cage. He's got to be careful of the guillotine. He can't leave his neck exposed. I think with these takedowns and Tsarukyan getting Ramos down to the mat, the guillotine is going to be the biggest threat. So as long as he stays out the way of that, he should be okay. And the reason I say that is because even if Tsarukyan lands in the guard of Ramos, yes, it's dangerous, but we've not really seen Ramos get submissions in MMA off his back with arm bars, with triangles. It's more a case of Ramos getting into the dominant positions on the mat, taking the back of his opponent and getting rear naked chokes, which seems to be his more preferred submission. I'm not convinced that if Tsarukyan lays in the guard of Ramos, that he gets tapped out with an armbar or a triangle. And I'm not sure he gets swept either. We saw how good Arman Tsarukyan's grappling and scrambles were against Makhachev. He was the first man to take Islam Makhachev down. And to be honest with you, I think he shocked the world in that performance of how good he actually is. So I don't think Tsarukyan's going to get rolled over in this fight. Even if Ramos takes Tsarukyan down, I think he'll be able to scramble back up to his feet before Ramos can get any solid position on the mat. I think stylistically it's not a great fight for Ramos. I think as long as Tsarukyan doesn't make a mistake on the feet and gets caught with a big bomb, and he doesn't do anything stupid on the mat and gets submitted with Ramos off his back, I think he'll win this fight. So I'm going to pick Arman Tsarukyan to win. And in the final fight of the breakdown, we've got the heavyweight Sergey Spivak versus the newcomer Carlos Felipe. Spivak currently the -130 favourite, the comeback on Felipe at +110. I think the value's with the underdog in this fight. I'm not so much of a fan of Sergey Spivak, if I'm honest, but Felipe actually looks like he could be very interesting at this level in the UFC heavyweight division. I'm not sure of his ceiling, I'm not sure how far he goes, but I definitely think that he's in for a bit of a chance of winning a few fights in the UFC for sure. So as the +110 underdog, I think the value's there. As for where the line moves, I could see this closing up just a little bit. I think we might even see this fight as a pick 'em come fight night. You know, -110 either side or -115 either side. But it could be a pick 'em by the time they both get into the cage, which I think could be relatively fair as well. You know, it is still a debut for Carlos Felipe. You've got to respect that. Sergey Spivak has had numerous fights now in the UFC, so he knows what this game's all about at this point. As for how this fight plays out, though, I think Carlos Felipe is going to be the bigger, stronger guy in there. Spivak will probably have a speed advantage, but Felipe isn't a very easy guy to take down, and for a big man, he's actually got good sprawls as well, quick sprawls, and he's got a topside game as well. He can grapple on top. He's looked good from the fights that I've seen, but the one thing that I have real concerns with is Felipe comes out hard. He swings bombs. He throws everything into every punch. Likes to be aggressive. You can clearly tell that he just wants to take somebody's head clean off early in the fight. And that's a concern at heavyweight because when we see guys at 265 pounds fighting this way, it normally gives you a very good indication that the cardio isn't going to hold out and they're going to gas. However, to Felipe's credit, when I've seen him fight in this way, in this aggressive manner, with throwing bombs, putting everything into every shot, he's actually not gassed as hard as what you'd expect later in fights, but it is still something that you've got to have a concern about for sure. Spivak's path to victory is to get Felipe down and work on top, similar to how he did against Tai Tuivasa. I just don't think it's going to be as easy to take Felipe down as what it was Tai Tuivasa. If he can get Felipe's back to the mat and settled, then I'm not sure Felipe will be able to get back up to his feet. But where Felipe could have success is using his strength, getting his underhooks in, defending takedowns that way, or even trying to stand right back up as soon as he's taken down, opposed to letting Spivak settle him on the mat. I think Felipe is going to have a big strength advantage over Spivak. I think he's going to be able to defend takedowns as well. And I think he's going to cause Spivak a lot of problems. If he starts hitting Spivak hard, it'll push Spivak back to the cage. Felipe can then be the aggressor, and then the fight sort of is in his favour at that point. This fight has a possibility of being very sluggish. It's got the possibility of being very ugly, but I'm going to pick Carlos Felipe to beat Sergey Spivak. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it, and once again guys, I'd appreciate all likes to the video and subscriptions to our new channel too. We're getting somewhere in between 1,000 and 2,000 views per event, per breakdown video. So if all you guys that are watching this video subscribe, it'd make me a very happy man. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and as a long-term gambler, winning over the last 3.5 years, that'll likely come good for you. And we cater for you fun gamblers too. You guys that like the long shot fun parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK. We've also got daily fantasy sports packages as well. That comes with a huge tape notes document on every fight. It comes with strategies and advice for both DraftKings and FanDuel. You get access to our private Discord chat room too. And we've got the $10 offers on both the betting advice and the DFS advice as well. Everything's very affordable at MMA Play 365, so just hop on to MMAPlay365.com and see what package is best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.